Only in America can someone declare a financial emergency because Target had a sale on scented candles. And trust me, if you think that's bad, the real disasters are still waiting. 1. A man once marched into a big box store with the urgency of someone buying sandbags before a hurricane and announced he needed an emergency replacement for his broken TV remote, because walking 3 steps to manually press the power button was, in his words, a threat to his cardiovascular well-being. He insisted this wasn't a luxury splurge, but a medically necessary purchase, as if the Surgeon General had issued a nationwide alert about the dangers of unassisted television operation. The cashier watched him clutch a $49 universal remote like it was life support, explaining that without it, he risked excessive calorie burn, a condition not found in any medical textbook. He even justified the overnight shipping fee by declaring that entertainment interruptions create dangerous psychological instability. The man left the store triumphant, having saved himself from the unimaginable hardship of using his own finger for 24 or 48 hours. Truly a modern hero, battling adversity one button at a time. 2. A woman caused a checkout line traffic jam because she insisted her $280 emergency purchase of artisanal scented candles was essential for household crisis management. According to her, the crisis was that her living room smelled neutral, a scent level she described as emotionally hazardous. She lectured employees about the psychological risks of existing in a room that didn't smell aggressively like sandalwood and lavender, implying civilization itself might collapse if she didn't restore corrective aromatherapy immediately. She even requested the manager escort her to the car so the candles wouldn't be exposed to destabilizing temperature shifts, as though she were transporting medical plasma instead of wax cylinders with marketing degrees. And because every emergency needs a financial twist, she justified the entire haul by claiming the candles were preventative therapy, which absolutely does not show up on any insurance form. She drove off in a Prius stuffed with enough fragrance to fumigate an entire suburb, leaving everyone else genuinely wondering if they'd misunderstood what the word emergency meant. 3. One guy treated a minor inconvenience like the opening scene of a disaster movie when he declared that running out of bacon on a Sunday morning constituted a level 5 household emergency. He sprinted to the grocery store, actually, sprinted, because apparently breakfast without processed salted meat is a situation FEMA should be monitoring. He grabbed every premium bacon brand like he was rescuing survivors from rubble, shouting into his phone that he was stabilizing the crisis. To add to the financial carnage, he bought a $200 cast iron skillet because his old one didn't sear with authority, a phrase typically reserved for generals, not cookware. When the cashier asked if he wanted a bag, he exhaled dramatically and said, "This is no time for questions." He returned home with enough pork to rebuild morale in a demoralized nation, all because he briefly faced the horror of making breakfast with eggs alone. If that isn't the purest form of American emergency spending, I don't know what is. 4. A suburban dad treated his malfunctioning smart thermostat like it had triggered DEFCON 1, insisting he needed a $39.99 emergency replacement because the temperature in his house fluctuated by an entire 2 degrees. He spoke about this micro variation as though it were a catastrophic weather event requiring immediate federal intervention. The man stormed into the home improvement store, demanding the highest-ranking thermostat they had, as if the devices were arranged by military rank rather than price. He also bought a $60 wall mount because, according to him, the standard mount lacked structural integrity, which is an interesting critique for an object holding a half-pound piece of plastic. He justified all of it by declaring that temperature instability leads to declining household morale, a claim normally made about revolutions, not HVAC settings. He returned home victorious, prepared to restore thermal justice to his living room and forever shield his family from the trauma of experiencing mildly cool air for 9 minutes. 5. A college student once used the phrase urgent survival protocol to justify buying a top-tier gaming chair after his old one lost a screw and tilted slightly to the left. The lean was barely noticeable, unless you were the kind of person who measures angles with a spirit level, but he claimed his spine was entering a danger zone, a statement spine specialists everywhere would love to annotate with laughter. Instead of spending $2 on a replacement screw, he dropped nearly $400 on a racing-style throne engineered for people who believe sitting should feel like piloting a starship. At checkout, he explained that without ergonomic support, he'd be unable to complete his assignments, which is interesting because the only deadlines he appeared concerned about involved in-game events. He carried the chair out like it was emergency equipment during an evacuation, convinced he had averted a medical catastrophe. Meanwhile, his original chair remained perfectly functional, except for the part where he decided it no longer counted as furniture. 6. One woman claimed she had a culinary emergency that required immediate purchase of a $600 professional-grade blender because her current blender left visible texture in her smoothies. She spoke with the intensity of someone explaining contaminated water supplies, except her crisis involved fruit not reaching perfect liquid homogeneity. She insisted that if she had to chew even slightly, the morning would be ruined beyond repair, and apparently that justified swiping her card like she was triaging a failing power grid. She even purchased a $39 insulated metal straw because she believed temperature retention was critical to emotional stability during high-stress mornings. The store associate nodded politely, probably trying to determine if this counted as performance art. She left with a machine capable of liquefying diamonds, absolutely convinced she had addressed a genuine emergency. Meanwhile, every actual emergency service in the nation continued operating without a single smoothie-related alert. 7. A guy once described a crooked picture frame as a threat to the entire home's aesthetic ecosystem, which is how he justified making a same-day, full-price purchase of a digital leveling laser he absolutely did not need. The frame was off by maybe 2 millimeters, an amount only detectable by people with too much time and not enough hobbies. But he insisted the imbalance could cause cascading visual dissonance, a phrase that could only be invented by someone who thinks interior design is a branch of theoretical physics. Naturally, he also bought a $120 set of mounting anchors powerful enough to secure a small aircraft. He completed the transaction with the solemnity of a man restoring order after a coup, then returned home to correct the microscopic tilt that no guest, neighbor, friend, or passing optometrist would ever have noticed. But in his mind, he had responded heroically to an existential emergency in the living room. 8. A woman treated her slightly worn yoga mat as though it had entered hospice care, insisting she had to make an emergency purchase of a deluxe $180 eco-friendly mat because the old one no longer carried supportive emotional energy. She claimed the faint discoloration on the edges was evidence of energetic depletion, a condition recognized nowhere except maybe in the marketing department of a yoga accessory company. While explaining this to the cashier, she picked up a matching $70 carrying strap because alignment requires consistency, which I assume is philosophy, but functions nicely as revenue. She justified all of it by asserting that using a tired mat could lead to spiritual instability, a surprisingly expensive risk for an object that spends most of its life rolled up under a couch. She drove home with the sense of triumph usually reserved for completing mountain expeditions, convinced she had rescued her wellness routine from total collapse. 9. A man once declared that running out of his favorite brand of moderately fancy sparkling water was a hydration emergency, requiring him to buy 3 entire cases at full price. He strolled into the store with the posture of someone delivering bad news to a nation, explaining to anyone within earshot that substituting regular water would compromise internal balance, which is the sort of scientific claim that makes scientists reconsider their career choices. Not content with simply restocking, he also bought a $150 countertop carbonation machine as backup infrastructure, a phrase normally associated with utilities, not beverages. At checkout, he sighed dramatically and muttered something about protecting his household from taste instability. He returned home with enough fizzy water to supply a minor political convention, fully convinced his decisive action had averted a domestic crisis, rather than illuminated how fragile his definition of necessity really was. 10. One teenager declared a full household emergency because her ring light died moments before she planned to film a makeup tutorial, prompting her to expedite a $90 replacement, like she was ordering a defibrillator. She spoke about lighting conditions as though she were performing delicate neurosurgery instead of recording a video destined to be watched mainly by people procrastinating assignments. She also purchased a collapsible backdrop because the wall didn't look emotionally supportive, an issue no governing agency has ever recognized. At the store, she explained to the mildly terrified clerk that darkness can destroy artistic credibility, a sentence that likely triggered flashbacks for every theater kid within a mile radius. She returned home absolutely confident she'd navigated a pressing emergency with precision and courage, ensuring the world could once again witness her blending eyeshadow under ethically sourced LED brilliance. 11. A guy convinced himself he needed to replace his perfectly functional phone charger with a 60 military-grade cable because his current one had a tiny fray near the connector. The fray wasn't even exposing wire, just a bit of plastic looking tired, but he insisted it posed an immediate operational threat, as if chargers routinely detonate. He justified the cost by explaining that his phone is mission critical, which is fascinating because the most mission-critical thing on his phone is probably a food delivery app. He also purchased a $40 cable protector because infrastructure redundancy is key, again demonstrating his talent for applying national security vocabulary to household electronics. The whole errand took 10 minutes and cost the equivalent of a nice dinner, but he returned home proud to have stabilized communications, even though the only entity he truly saved was the revenue line of a tech accessory company. 12. One woman treated a minor scuff on her white sneakers like a medical emergency, requiring a $120 emergency sneaker cleaning kit complete with 8 brushes, 3 microfiber cloths, a bottle of foam cleanser, and something described as restorative sneaker serum. She explained that the scuff threatened her public aesthetic integrity, which is a dramatic way to describe the consequences of stepping outside. She insisted the kit was cheaper than replacing the sneakers, which is mathematically true but philosophically unconvincing when the sneakers weren't dying. They were simply living their lives. She also bought a UV shoe sanitizer because optics matter, a phrase formerly reserved for politics but now apparently relevant to footwear. She left the store with enough cleaning supplies to maintain an entire athletic department, proud that she'd handled her emergency with precision. Meanwhile, her original scuff remained a perfectly normal interaction between gravity, sidewalks, and the realities of owning shoes. 13. A man described a momentary Wi-Fi slowdown as infrastructure failure and immediately purchased a high-end $349 router, claiming he needed emergency bandwidth restoration for reasons that sounded important until you remembered he mostly streams cooking videos he never actually makes. He insisted his old router had entered retirement unexpectedly, a poetic exaggeration for a device that simply needed rebooting. But instead of pressing the reset button, he marched to the store with the sense of duty usually reserved for battlefield reinforcements. He also bought a $90 premium Ethernet cable because data deserves respect, a sentence surely crafted moments before checkout to justify the price. Upon returning home, he installed the new hardware like he was stabilizing a power grid, all to eliminate a minor lag that lasted exactly 6 seconds. But in his mind, he'd prevented a digital catastrophe, restoring order to a household that never asked for heroics at all. 14. A woman experienced mild irritation when her bathtub drain slowed, prompting her to declare structural plumbing collapse and embark on an emergency purchase of a $200 electric drain snake she absolutely did not need. A $5 bottle of drain cleaner would have solved everything, but she insisted chemicals were too unpredictable, which is ironic considering she was now wielding a device capable of tunneling through drywall if misused. She spoke to the hardware associate as though she were overseeing a municipal repair project, emphasizing that rapid intervention prevents long-term destabilization, which is both dramatic and irrelevant when the real destabilization is her impulse purchase reflex. She also grabbed industrial-grade gloves because precision demands armor, heightening the sense that she was preparing to confront a mythic creature rather than a clump of hair. She returned home ready to vanquish her villainous drain, blissfully unaware she had spent hundreds solving a problem most people fix between loads of laundry. 15. A guy panicked when he misplaced his AirPods for an entire 20 minutes and immediately purchased a brand new pair at full price, declaring the situation an audio emergency. He did this before checking any of the common hiding spots, coat pocket, backpack, couch cushion, reality, but insisted that sound deprivation created mental instability. He claimed he couldn't risk being without background noise, as though silence itself were a dangerous environmental hazard. To strengthen the illusion of necessity, he also bought a $50 silicone case because loss prevention begins with color coding, a phrase that would make sense only if he hadn't just lost a pair he already owned. Naturally, he found the original AirPods the moment he returned home, sitting exactly where anyone else would have checked first. Instead of recognizing the comedic tragedy, he reframed it as resource redundancy, which is one way to describe owning 2 identical sets of luxury earbuds by accident. 16. A woman treated the disappearance of her favorite lip balm as if her entire facial ecosystem were collapsing, prompting her to make an emergency run to buy 8 replacements in different seasonal moods. The lip balm wasn't medically necessary, it wasn't even tinted, but she insisted her lips were at risk of imminent structural dryness, a phrase dermatologists undoubtedly whisper to each other for fun. At checkout, she explained that going even an hour without moisture would destabilize her daily rhythm, a claim that suggests her schedule was held together with beeswax. She also purchased a $40 lip exfoliating wand because texture is destiny, which is not a recognized law of physics, but certainly sounds confident. She returned home stocked for a decade, clutching her balms like survival rations, absolutely certain she had prevented a personal catastrophe. Meanwhile, humanity continued surviving thousands of years without midday vanilla mint hydration. 17. A man faced a tragedy of unimaginable scale when he discovered his office chair squeaked every time he leaned back, a noise level that most people would describe as barely audible, but he categorized as ergonomic sabotage. Naturally, he purchased a brand new $500 executive chair on the spot because lubrication, apparently, was a temporary bandage on a long-term wound. He chatted with the salesperson like he was selecting prosthetic limbs, emphasizing the importance of spinal justice, a term so grandiose it deserves its own congressional committee. He also bought a $75 lumbar pillow because his back required strategic reinforcement, something it hadn't required at any point before the chair squeak incident. He returned to work proudly rolling into the office like a man who had just negotiated peace treaties rather than replacing a chair that didn't actually need replacing. But in his universe, squeaks are signals of cosmic imbalance, and furniture emergencies must be met with decisive financial force. 18. A woman once treated a minor tear in her throw blanket like a full-scale domestic catastrophe, announcing she needed an emergency textile intervention and buying a $220 weighted blanket because her old one had betrayed her trust. The tear was the size of a Tic Tac, but she insisted it represented structural failure and could destabilize her sleep patterns, which is a poetic way of saying she didn't feel like sewing. She explained to the store associate that untreated blanket damage leads to emotional drafts, a condition neither therapists nor meteorologists have ever documented. Naturally, she also grabbed a $40 lavender pillow spray because trauma requires aromatherapy, a statement that suggests she believes every household object deserves its own healing arc. She left the store carrying her new blanket like it was a rescued infant, completely confident she'd solved a crisis that existed only because she declared it won. 19. A guy framed his burnt toast as a culinary emergency, requiring immediate purchase of a $300 smart toaster, the kind with touchscreen settings that suggest humanity has truly lost perspective. The original toaster had simply overheated after years of loyal service, but he described it as toxic machinery, sabotaging his mornings. He paced the appliance aisle telling employees that inconsistent browning destroys productivity, which is fascinating, considering he was clearly prepared to spend his entire morning ranting about bread. He also bought a surge protector to prevent future casualties, as though toast appliances were dropping like flies in a war zone. When he returned home, he ceremonially retired his old toaster like a fallen veteran and unboxed the new one with reverence, convinced he had taken swift action to preserve national breakfast stability. Meanwhile, the burnt toast remained in the trash, unaffected, untroubled, and thoroughly not an emergency. 20. A woman experienced what she called a hydration crisis after leaving her reusable water bottle in her car, which she insisted rendered it thermally compromised. The water was lukewarm, not radioactive, but she marched into a sporting goods store and purchased a $68 temperature-regulated bottle like she was securing government-grade equipment. She claimed that drinking water outside its optimal range disrupts internal performance, which might concern Olympic athletes, but is less convincing when you're buying it to drink at your accounting job. She also purchased a $25 bottle brush because contamination is everywhere, making it unclear whether she was trying to hydrate or sanitize a submarine. She returned home triumphantly, armed with a hydration system that could survive an Arctic expedition, even though the harshest environment she'd expose it to was the office kitchenette next to a passive-aggressive sign about cleaning your own mug. 21. A man discovered his favorite hoodie had lost its drawstring and reacted as if FEMA should be alerted, declaring an urgent comfort deficit that justified buying a $120 designer replacement. He insisted the absence of a string compromised thermal regulation, which was an ambitious interpretation of physics given that the hoodie still existed, still had sleeves, and still covered his body. When the cashier asked if he wanted a bag, he said he needed it for transport security, implying the garment might escape or be stolen by comfort bandits. He returned home and immediately threw out the old hoodie, which could have been fixed with a shoelace. But apparently he believed repair was an outdated concept practiced only by ancient civilizations. In his mind, he rescued himself from a spiraling comfort crisis. To everyone else, he just paid triple digits to avoid tying a knot. 22. One woman treated a flickering lamp bulb like a supernatural omen and rushed to buy a $95 smart LED bulb with color presets named things like Zen Forest and Mountain Confidence. The original bulb cost $3 and was simply nearing the end of its lifespan. But she explained that the flicker was energetic instability that threatened her sense of peace. She described the replacement bulb as a spiritual emergency tool, which probably confused the clerk who had only been trained to answer questions about wattage. To complete the ambiance, she purchased a $60 smart plug so her lamp could turn on with intention, a phrase rarely applied to electricity. She went home ready to restore balance to her living room through controlled mood lighting, blissfully unaware that ancient humans survived thousands of years without light bulbs that communicated their feelings through Bluetooth. 23. A man treated his slightly delayed package delivery like a civilization-ending event and immediately bought a $400 smart doorbell system with multiple cameras because he could no longer trust the fabric of reality. The package was running 2 hours late, not lost in a black hole, but he insisted his home needed logistical surveillance infrastructure to prevent unspecified threats. He also purchased an extra motion sensor for the backyard because, and I quote, "the shadows are unpredictable," which is a bold statement considering the shadows were just shadows. The cashier completed the transaction with the grim patience of someone who has heard too many people say words like operational integrity. He returned home and installed everything before the package even arrived, creating a small-scale security grid over a situation that required only waiting. But in his mind, he had prevented a delivery apocalypse by upgrading his porch into NORAD. 24. A woman insisted she needed an emergency aesthetic realignment because her living room throw pillows were emotionally outdated, prompting her to buy 6 new pillows at a cost that could have funded a small camping trip. The old pillows had no stains, no rips, no tragic history. They were simply last season's colors, which apparently now qualifies as a domestic crisis. She explained to the store employee that misaligned color palettes create psychological turbulence, a phrase surely invented by a home decor blogger after too much caffeine. Naturally, she also bought a $45 blanket she didn't need because it completed the narrative, proving that interior design is now treated like literature. She left the store with enough fluff to cushion a minor meteor landing, convinced she had restored order to her living room. Meanwhile, the old pillows sat quietly at home, wondering how they got fired from a job no one asked them to do. 25. A guy once made an emergency electronics purchase because his laptop fan made a faint whirring noise, a sound so subtle it could have been mistaken for ambient air molecules doing their job. He panicked and bought a $200 new laptop because he refused to operate under mechanical duress, which would be a powerful statement if he were piloting a jet instead of browsing sports stats. He also grabbed a $90 cooling pad because heat is the enemy, and apparently his enemy strategy involves throwing money at anything with LED lights. He didn't bother cleaning the dust out of the old fan, which would have solved the issue in seconds. No, this was a crisis requiring decisive financial escalation. He returned home, opened the new laptop, and proceeded to use it exactly the same way as the old one, mostly to Google unrelated questions and ignore half-finished emails. But in his mind, he had triumphed over adversity. 26. One woman declared a footwear emergency after her treadmill shoes made a faint squeak, a sound so insignificant it registered only if you listened for it. And she did, with the vigilance of someone monitoring seismic activity. She immediately purchased $180 running shoes, despite openly admitting she doesn't run. She just walks with purpose, which must be how purpose got so expensive. She then bought custom insoles because alignment is everything, a sentiment typically shared by chiropractors and cult leaders. She returned home and placed her old shoes in the closet for emergencies, which was ironic because the emergency had just been defined as the existence of those shoes. Her treadmill squeaked again anyway, revealing the shocking truth. The sound was the treadmill itself, but she didn't return the shoes. No, they were her trophies for surviving the harrowing ordeal of minor auditory inconvenience. 27. A man once panicked because his microwave took an extra 6 seconds to heat his food, prompting him to accuse the appliance of thermal incompetence and buy a $300 upgrade with precision heating algorithms. He told the store clerk he refused to live in a home where meals required guesswork, as though he were defusing bombs rather than reheating day-old pasta. He also purchased a microwave-safe thermometer because accuracy equals safety, a phrase you might expect in a chemistry lab, but not in a one-bedroom apartment where the most hazardous thing is usually stink from an unattended fridge. He returned home energized by his victory over slow heating, only to discover the problem had been caused by him accidentally setting the old microwave to a lower power level. But he kept the new one anyway, because, after all, emergencies must be respected, even when they're imaginary. 28. A woman declared a hair care emergency because her blow dryer emitted what she described as unsettled airflow, which is impressive, considering air does not have emotional states. The dryer still worked perfectly, but she bought a $250 salon-grade model because precision drying affects identity, a concept that would make philosophers exhausted. She then selected a heat protectant spray priced like an engagement ring because tools must operate in harmony, demonstrating her strong commitment to ensuring her bathroom counter looked like a backstage Broadway vanity. The clerk offered a cheaper alternative, but she insisted performance cannot be negotiated, which is an interesting stance when the performance in question is blasting hot air at your own head. She left with enough hair equipment to open a small boutique, confident she had averted a crisis. Meanwhile, the old blow dryer continued to work fine, quietly wondering why it had been exiled for the crime of existing. 29. A man treated the discovery of a single fruit fly in his kitchen as the opening move in a biological war, prompting him to buy $150 worth of traps, sprays, repellents, and an ultrasonic plug-in that probably just annoys the neighbor's dog. He insisted he was re-establishing territorial dominance, a bold statement considering his adversary weighed less than a grain of rice. The cashier tried suggesting a simpler fix, take out the trash, but he rejected that as naive diplomacy. He returned home armed with enough supplies to fumigate a warehouse, only to discover the fruit fly was actually hovering over a banana peel he'd left out for 3 days. After removing the peel, the fly vanished, proving the real emergency was his relationship with basic housekeeping. But he kept the gadgets anyway, because every hero needs unnecessary equipment. 30. One woman experienced mild eye strain while doom scrolling and decided her phone was optically dangerous, prompting her to buy a $999 new model with eye comfort enhancements, designed primarily to make people feel good about overspending. She claimed the old phone projected aggressive light frequencies, which sounds scientific until you remember she used it voluntarily for 5 hours a day. She also bought a $60 blue light screen protector because prevention is cheaper than repair, which is only true if prevention doesn't cost as much as a utility bill. She returned home, transferred her contacts, and immediately resumed doom scrolling on the new device, demonstrating that the emergency was never the phone. It was her unwillingness to reduce screen time by even a minute. But at least she solved her eye strain with a high-priced existential upgrade. 31. A guy declared a coffee crisis because his mug had a tiny hairline crack, the kind of flaw most people ignore until the mug simply gives up one day. He, however, saw this as a sign of imminent caffeine doom and purchased a $75 insulated mug engineered to survive a small explosion. At checkout, he explained that his mornings depend on thermal reliability, which is admirable dedication for someone who routinely forgets to take out the trash. He also bought a mug warmer, a device that basically functions as a tiny heated coaster, because temperature should never fluctuate, a belief rarely expressed outside of controlled scientific experiments. He returned home convinced he had rescued his entire morning routine, while the original cracked mug quietly sat in the sink, guiltless and perfectly capable of holding one last cup of coffee if anyone had just let it. 32. A woman discovered her vacuum cleaner wasn't picking up cat hair quite as efficiently as before, and immediately declared an all-points domestic sanitation emergency, marching to the store to buy a top-tier pet hair vacuum costing nearly a week's salary. The old vacuum merely needed a filter cleaning, but she insisted it had lost its will to fight, which sounds like something you say about a medieval knight, not an appliance with a clogged hose. She also grabbed a $30 attachment specifically shaped for stair corners, despite not having stairs, because preparedness matters, a philosophy she apparently does not apply to reading labels. She stormed home triumphant, ready to reclaim her carpets, and her cat watched with the quiet disbelief of an animal who knows it is the actual cause of all this chaos. Meanwhile, the old vacuum sat in the corner suffering from neglect, not malfunction. 33. A man treated his slightly smudged glasses as an optical catastrophe requiring a $200 pair of emergency designer frames, even though all he needed was a $2 cleaning wipe and a moment of honesty. He explained to the optician that his visual infrastructure had degraded, which is an impressive way to say he touched his own lenses with his thumb. Not satisfied with just the frames, he added on anti-glare coating, blue light filtering, scratch resistance, and a protective case that looked like it was engineered for transporting classified documents. He left the store with eyewear so advanced it practically qualified as wearable tech, despite the fact that his vision was perfectly fine before lunch. Later at home, he found the smudge on his old glasses and wiped it off with his shirt, proving the entire emergency was a negotiation between pride and fingerprints. 34. A woman experienced what she called audio instability after her old Bluetooth speaker crackled for half a second during a playlist shuffle, prompting her to buy a $250 replacement with bass settings strong enough to intimidate small wildlife. She insisted the crackle shattered her sonic environment, which is a dramatic way of saying the speaker coughed once. She also upgraded to a premium music subscription because clarity requires commitment, a statement that would be inspirational if it weren't about pop music. She mostly played at low volume while doing dishes. She returned home, set up her new sound system, and congratulated herself for restoring harmony to her kitchen, as if she were tuning an orchestra rather than blasting lo-fi beats. Meanwhile, the old speaker quietly waited, perfectly capable of functioning if given a second chance, something she apparently reserves only for people, not electronics. 35. A man once treated losing the remote for his ceiling fan as a climate emergency, insisting he needed a $600 Wi-Fi controlled fan because manually pulling a chain was prehistoric suffering. He wandered the aisle explaining to a confused employee that vertical airflow cannot be left to chance, as though rogue breezes were plotting a coup. He also bought a $90 smart home hub so his new fan could communicate with the Thermostat, creating a household diplomacy summit between appliances that did not need to talk. The old fan still worked perfectly, but he declared it outdated infrastructure, which is the same phrase people use for bridges on the brink of collapse, not ceiling fans that simply spin. When he got home, he proudly synced everything to an app and announced he had restored environmental stability, ignoring the fact that his entire crisis began because he didn't look under the couch cushion. 36. A woman once discovered her ice cube tray cracked slightly at one corner and immediately upgraded to a $400 countertop ice machine, claiming she refused to live in a world with irregular cubes. The tray still formed perfectly usable ice, but she described the crack as a failure of domestic architecture, as if her freezer had violated building codes. She then bought a $30 flavored water infuser because coolness deserves personality, which raised the uncomfortable question of whether beverages were now expected to perform. The cashier gently asked if she needed anything else, and she replied, "Not unless you sell emotional stability," which is certainly one way to justify spending half a paycheck on frozen water. She returned home and displayed her machine like a luxury car, producing artisanal cubes while the old tray sat nearby, still capable, still frozen, still unworthy of her crisis-driven standards. 37. A guy treated the sudden disappearance of his favorite pen as an intellectual emergency, declaring he could not generate ideas unless he purchased a $129 limited edition creativity pen made from recycled aircraft metal. He insisted great thoughts require great tools, a theory unsupported by the countless brilliant people who used pencils that cost 9 cents. To ensure the pen's safety, he also bought a $45 carrying case lined with velvet, as if his grocery lists required museum-grade protection. At checkout, he solemnly told the cashier this purchase would unlock productivity, which is a bold promise for a pen he would likely misplace within the week. He returned home brimming with creative anticipation, only to find his original pen resting peacefully exactly where he left it. Under the notebook he never opens, but he kept the new pen, announcing it was backup genius, proving that emergencies sometimes look suspiciously like excuses for shiny nonsense. 38. A woman became alarmed when her smartwatch informed her she'd only taken 3,000 steps by noon and declared a fitness malfunction. purchasing a $200 treadmill because her body was refusing to participate in productivity. She explained to the salesperson that step count is destiny, which must have been news to every human who existed before wearable trackers. She also bought a $50 mat to absorb emotional impact, which was definitely a creative interpretation of the word impact. After setting everything up, she walked exactly 7 minutes and felt accomplished enough to reward herself with a pastry, which mathematically canceled out the workout she barely completed. Meanwhile, her smartwatch, which caused the crisis in the first place, continued quietly counting, blissfully unaware that it had inspired yet another episode of retail cardio, America's most consistent form of exercise. 39. A man treated forgetting his grocery list as a logistical breach and immediately purchased a $900 tablet, claiming handwritten lists were vulnerable to human error. He spoke as though he were upgrading military communication systems rather than remembering to buy milk. He also grabbed a $60 stylus because he preferred analog gestures in a digital world, which is a poetic way of saying he wanted to write on a screen instead of paper. The employee asked if he'd considered using the Notes app on his phone, and he looked genuinely insulted, as though she'd suggested he store state secrets in a lunchbox. He returned home triumphant and wrote his list on the tablet, only to forget the tablet on the kitchen counter as he drove to the store. Based on his logic, this meant it was time to buy something even more expensive. 40. A woman once panicked when her essential oil diffuser made a faint bubbling sound, declaring it an omen of energetic decay. She immediately purchased a $250 replacement with a forest mist mode, which she claimed restored spiritual alignment. The old diffuser was simply low on water, but apparently refilling things is no longer part of the modern skill set. She also purchased 3 new oils labeled things like Eternal Serenity and Confidence Vapor, which made the cashier blink several times before deciding she didn't get paid enough to ask follow-up questions. Back home, she proudly activated the new diffuser, filling the room with a scented haze strong enough to stun a small bird, and announced that harmony had returned. Meanwhile, the original emergency remained unsolved. She still didn't know how to pour water into a small container without panicking. 41. A guy discovered his car's low fuel light had turned on and treated it like a hostage situation, rushing to buy a $300 portable power station because modern drivers must be prepared for anything. He was 3 minutes from a gas station. He insisted the risk of fuel disruption warranted emergency spending, as though gasoline lines were being cut by enemy forces. He also bought a collapsible fuel funnel because precision matters in a crisis, despite the fact that no crisis was happening and funnels cost $2 everywhere else. When he finally drove to the gas station, he filled up normally, never opening any of the emergency equipment he'd purchased, but he kept it all proudly in the trunk, referring to it as his fuel resilience kit, because nothing screams preparedness like overspending to avoid doing something easy. 42. One woman called her minor sunburn a dermal catastrophe and bought a $160 skincare bundle marketed with phrases like skin rebirth and restorative luminosity. The sunburn was the mild pink hue you get after misjudging the shade by 2 steps, but she spoke as though she'd been rescued from an active volcano. She then purchased an aloe plant because healing must come from nature, which was quite a statement from someone who had just spent more than a week's groceries on products made mostly of stabilized chemicals. The skincare consultant tried gently suggesting regular sunscreen, but she waved it off, insisting that her skin required emergency intervention, not preventative theory. She returned home and applied enough lotion to glaze a ham, convinced she had saved her epidermis from annihilation. Meanwhile, the aloe plant sat quietly, awaiting its inevitable neglect. 43. A man once treated the loss of his favorite pizza cutter wheel as if civilization had collapsed, prompting him to buy a 280 culinary performance blade engineered from stainless steel that looked capable of amputations. The old cutter had simply gone missing, likely buried in a drawer filled with other lost kitchen tools, but he insisted pizza demands instrumental accuracy. He also purchased a sharpening block, even though the blade would touch nothing more demanding than mozzarella. When the cashier asked if he was planning to open a restaurant, he responded, "Precision doesn't need a business model," which became the most inspirational sentence ever spoken in a kitchenware aisle. At home, he sliced his pizza with military-grade crispness, smiled proudly, then immediately forgot to wash the cutter, creating the perfect conditions for losing this one too. 44. A woman became horrified when her houseplant drooped slightly, diagnosing it with botanical collapse and rushing to buy a $200 smart planter that tracks moisture, temperature, and, apparently, self-esteem. The plant was just thirsty, but she explained to the garden associate that natural intuition was unreliable and her flora required data-driven nurturing. She also bought premium soil infused with something called root vitality crystals, a term invented by someone who knew their customers well. She returned home, transferred the plant with the seriousness of a surgeon, and celebrated when its leaves lifted, again because she watered it. But she gave all the credit to the planter, proudly claiming technology had resurrected her houseplant. Meanwhile, the root vitality crystals sat quietly in the dirt, doing exactly nothing. 45. A guy once noticed his TV remote had a half-second delay and declared the device operationally compromised, prompting him to spend $1,500 upgrading to a new television entirely. He claimed the delay ruined his navigational flow, which is a bold thing to say about scrolling through streaming menus he never finishes. The salesperson suggested replacing the batteries, but he dismissed that as short-term thinking, as though buying a new TV every time he encountered inconvenience was a long-term strategy. He also grabbed a wall mount because he believed elevated screens elevate the mind, which may be the first time interior design was confused with psychotherapy. He returned home, hung the TV, and discovered the delay persisted because the issue was his internet. But admitting that would require humility, and humility is apparently incompatible with emergency electronics spending. 46. A woman treated a slightly tight pair of jeans as a personal crisis, requiring an immediate wardrobe overhaul, buying $400 worth of comfort-fit lifestyle denim. She insisted her old jeans no longer aligned with her mobility values, a phrase that deserves a place in the National Museum of Overreaction. She also bought a specialized jean care detergent because ordinary detergent lacked emotional gentleness, proving that brand marketing is stronger than gravity. At home, she marveled at how the new jeans fit perfectly, mostly because she bought a size up. Meanwhile, her old jeans sat folded nearby, still perfectly wearable, still innocent, still sacrificed to the altar of emergency purchasing, joining a long line of household items that didn't ask to be involved in someone's panic spiral. 47. A man once burned a single popcorn kernel in his microwave and immediately purchased a $700 air fryer because he refused to engage with combustion appliances. The microwave was fine. The kernel was not. He explained to the clerk that thermal volatility could no longer be tolerated in his kitchen, which is ironic because microwaves aren't known for spontaneous explosions. Humans, however, are great at pressing the wrong button. He also picked up a digital thermometer because data prevents disappointment, which is one way to describe obsessively measuring snack temperatures. At home, he proudly air-fried his popcorn, declared it a revelation, and then burned half the batch anyway. Apparently, the real thermal volatility was just his inability to follow instructions. 48. A woman panicked when she noticed her reflection looked slightly fatigued, prompting her to buy a $350 vanity mirror with built-in lights named things like Hollywood Glow and Goddess Radiance. The actual problem was that she'd been awake since 3 a.m., watching documentaries she didn't understand. But blaming the mirror was more affordable emotionally, even if financially it was a disaster. She also bought a $75 beauty sponge because texture matters, which is bold, considering her main concern was light. She brought everything home, set up the mirror, turned it on, and immediately looked exactly the same. But she smiled anyway, because nothing cures exhaustion like spending hundreds of dollars to avoid going to bed at a reasonable hour. 49. A guy once triggered a personal financial meltdown because his gaming keyboard's spacebar squeaked, prompting him to buy a $280 mechanical keyboard engineered for competitive precision, even though he only played farming simulators. He also bought custom keycaps shaped like tiny vegetables, which the cashier could not comment on without professionally collapsing. He declared the new keyboard essential for digital productivity, a hilarious claim considering he hadn't opened a productivity app since college. Back home, he typed 3 sentences, admired the sound, and then returned to his farming game, where the spacebar is almost never used. Meanwhile, his old keyboard remained perfectly functional, except for the part where he abandoned it for squeaking once. 50. A woman discovered her coffee frother wasn't spinning as vigorously as usual and treated it as a catastrophic foam failure. prompting her to buy a full espresso machine that cost as much as a month's rent. The frother was just low on batteries, but she insisted her mornings required high-aeration beverages, a term that means absolutely nothing outside the Starbucks training manual. She also bought espresso cups so small they looked like thimbles because presentation elevates ritual, proving she'd entered a level of caffeinated spirituality mere mortals cannot achieve. At home, she made a single espresso, declared it life-changing, and promptly returned to her old routine of buying coffee on the way to work. The machine now lives on her counter as an $800 monument to panic-driven consumer choices. 51. A man once saw a tiny spider on his shower wall and responded by ordering a $500 bathroom renovation kit because he believed the entire structural ecosystem had been compromised. The spider wasn't venomous. It wasn't even moving. It was probably confused about how it ended up in the home of someone this dramatic. He bought new tiles, new fixtures, a new fan system to regulate biological incursions, and even a motion-activated soap dispenser, because apparently hygiene must now be subcontracted to robotics. By the time everything arrived, the spider had vanished on its own, presumably fleeing the scene out of secondhand embarrassment. And that's how a single creature smaller than a raisin inspired the most expensive emergency purchase in the entire list. A renovation triggered not by danger, not by damage, but by a man who believed the correct response to nature was to bulldoze the bathroom. A perfect ending to the human tradition of turning inconveniences into catastrophes and catastrophes into shopping sprees. If that parade of financial panic purchases didn't break your spirit, congratulations. Drop your dumbest emergency buy in the comments. Let's see who truly reigns supreme in chaos shopping.